The storm had teeth. Jacob Harlan pressed his palm against the bullet wound in his side, feeling warm blood seep between his fingers as his horse stumbled through knee-deep snow. Behind him, somewhere in the white fury of the blizzard, he could still hear the posse's dogs baying. The sound came and went with the wind, sometimes close enough to make his heart pound, sometimes so distant he wondered if death had finally claimed him, and this was hell. An endless winter chase through mountains that scraped the belly of heaven. His horse, a sturdy Mustang he'd stolen 3 towns back, wheezed beneath him, its sides heaving with each labored step. Ice crystals formed around its nostrils, and Jacob knew the animal wouldn't last much longer. Neither would he. Come to think of it, the cold had long since numbed his extremities, and the wound in his side sent fire through his body with each movement. The failed stagecoach robbery played through his mind like a fever dream. It was supposed to be simple: hit the coach on Dead Man's Curve, take the mine payroll, disappear into the Rockies before anyone knew what happened. But someone had talked. The law was waiting, guns drawn, turning the narrow mountain pass into a shooting gallery. 2 of his gang were dead before they could draw iron. The third, young Tommy Briggs, took a bullet through the throat and drowned in his own blood while Jacob watched, helpless. Now Jacob was alone, wounded, and riding into the teeth of a storm that promised to bury him as surely as any grave. Through the swirling snow, he caught a glimpse of smoke, just a thin gray line against the white sky, but it might as well have been a beacon from God himself. Where there was smoke, there was fire. Where there was fire, there was warmth. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to live through the night. He urged his dying horse toward the smoke, following a narrow deer trail that wound between towering pines. The trees offered some protection from the wind, but the snow was deeper here, in some places reaching the horse's belly. Twice the animal stumbled, nearly throwing him. The second time, Jacob decided to walk, leading the exhausted Mustang by its reins. Each step was agony. The wound had stopped bleeding, whether from his makeshift bandage or the cold. He couldn't say, but movement sent sharp pains through his entire torso. His breath came in ragged gasps that crystallized in the air before him. The world narrowed to the next step, then the next. Following that thread of smoke like a lifeline, the cabin appeared suddenly through a break in the trees, a low structure of rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, its roof heavy with snow. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed behind oiled paper windows. To Jacob, it looked like paradise. He tied his horse to a scraggly pine and stumbled to the door, each step requiring enormous effort. His frozen fingers fumbled at the latch, and he had to pound on the rough wood with his fist. "Open up!" His voice was hoarse, barely audible above the wind. "Please, I need help." For a long moment, nothing. Then he heard movement inside, the scrape of a chair, footsteps on wooden boards. The door opened a crack, and Jacob found himself staring down the barrel of a Winchester rifle. The woman holding it couldn't have been more than 30, though the hard mountain life had etched lines around her eyes and mouth. She wore a heavy wool dress and a man's coat that was too big for her frame. Dark hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back in a severe bun. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as summer leaves, hard as flint, studying him with the wary intelligence of a wolf. "State your business," she said, her voice steady despite the howling wind that tried to rip the door from her grip. Jacob tried to answer, but the world was spinning now, tilting on some invisible axis. He reached out to steady himself against the doorframe, and his hand came away bloody. The woman's eyes tracked the movement, took in his pale face, the blood on his clothes, the way he swayed on his feet. He began, but darkness was creeping in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw was her face, beautiful despite its hardness, or perhaps because of it, before his knees buckled and he pitched forward into the snow. When consciousness returned, it came in pieces. First, warmth, blessed, life-giving warmth that seemed to seep into his very bones. Then pain, sharp and insistent, radiating from his side. He tried to move and found he couldn't. Panic flared until he realized he was bound, his hands tied with rough rope to the iron frame of a narrow bed. The cabin's interior slowly came into focus. It was a single room, maybe 20 feet square, with the bed against one wall and a stone fireplace dominating another. A rough table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the space, and shelves lined with preserves and supplies covered most of the remaining walls. Everything was clean but worn, speaking of a life lived on the hard edge of survival. The woman sat in one of the chairs, the Winchester across her lap, watching him with those unsettling green eyes. She'd removed his gun belt. He could see it hanging on a peg near the door, well out of reach. Smart woman. "You're awake," she said, not moving from her chair. "Wasn't sure you'd make it. Lost a lot of blood." Jacob's throat felt like sandpaper. "Water," he croaked. She studied him for a long moment, then rose and filled a tin cup from a bucket near the fireplace. She approached cautiously, keeping the rifle within easy reach, and held the cup to his lips. The water was cold and sweet, the best thing he'd ever tasted. "What's your name?" she asked, settling back in her chair. He hesitated. His real name was plastered on wanted posters from here to Texas. "Tom," he lied. "Tom Garrett." Something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or recognition. But she simply nodded. "I'm Sarah Brennan." She gestured to his bound hands. "Sorry about the ropes, but a woman alone can't be too careful, especially with strange men who show up shot and bleeding on her doorstep." "Fair enough," Jacob admitted. He tested the bonds, tight but not cruel. "Your husband coming back soon?" "My husband's been in the ground 2 winters now," she said flatly. "It's just me here." They studied each other across the small space, 2 creatures caught in an awkward dance of mistrust and necessity. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in this small world of firelight and shadow. "I patched you up best I could," Sarah continued. "Bullet went clean through, that's lucky. But you need proper rest and care, or infection will finish what that bullet started." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know what trouble you're running from, Tom Garrett, and I don't much care, but I won't have dying on my doorstep, and I won't have trouble brought to my home. You understand?" Jacob nodded, though they both knew trouble had already arrived, bound to her bed with rope and bleeding through her clean bandages. "Good." She rose, setting the rifle against the wall, but still within reach. "There's stew on the fire. You need to eat. Keep your strength up." As she ladled thin venison stew into a bowl, Jacob studied her movements, economical, practiced, with a kind of fierce grace that spoke of years fending for herself in this unforgiving wilderness. When she fed him, her hands were gentle despite their calluses, and he caught a scent of pine smoke and something flowery lavender, maybe carefully hoarded in this place where beauty was a luxury few could afford. Their eyes met over the spoon, and something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the recognition of one survivor to another. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their voices mixing with the wind's keen. But inside the cabin, for now, there was warmth and food and the possibility of living through the night. "Thank you," Jacob said when the bowl was empty. Sarah studied him with those green eyes that seemed to see too much. "Don't thank me yet, Tom Garrett. This storm's likely to last days, and we've got a long way to go before either of us can rest easy." She was right, of course. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one he'd brought with him. The law, the blood on his hands, the lies that sat between them like stones. But for now, in this moment, with firelight dancing on rough-hewn walls and his body finally warm, Jacob allowed himself to close his eyes and drift into the first real sleep he'd had in days. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight, he was alive, and that was enough. The morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had grown worse overnight, the wind howling like a living thing trying to claw its way through the cabin walls. Sarah Brennan moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, melting snow for water, checking the shutters that groaned against their latches. Jacob watched her through half-closed eyes, feigning sleep while he assessed his situation. His hands were still bound, though she'd loosened the ropes enough to restore circulation. The pain in his side had settled into a deep, throbbing ache that flared whenever he shifted position. But he was alive, and that was more than he'd expected when he'd stumbled to her door. Sarah knew he was awake. He could tell by the way she kept the rifle close, by the careful distance she maintained as she went about her tasks. She was no fool. This woman, living alone in the mountains, had taught her caution, and she wore it like armor. "No use pretending," she said without turning from the fireplace. "Your breathing changed 10 minutes ago." Jacob opened his eyes fully. "Habit, I suppose. Lots of habits can get a man killed out here." She turned to face him, arms crossed. "That wound needs checking. Infection sets in fast in the cold." She approached with the same wariness as before, setting a basin of warm water and clean rags on the small table beside the bed. Her hands were gentle but impersonal as she unwound the bandages, and Jacob bit back a groan as the cloth pulled away from the dried blood. "You're lucky," she said, examining the wound. "Inch to the left and it would have hit something vital. Inch to the right and it would have shattered a rib." She began cleaning the wound with practiced movements. You know anything about medicine, Tom Garrett?" "Some," Jacob admitted. "Learned to patch myself up over the years. I imagine you did." Her tone was neutral, but he caught the implication. Honest men rarely needed to treat their own gunshot wounds. "What about you?" he asked, trying to shift the conversation. "That's skilled work for someone who isn't a doctor. My husband taught me." Something in her face shuddered closed. "Said a woman alone needs to know how to handle anything that comes her way. Sickness, injury, birth, death." He was right about that, if nothing else. She finished redressing the wound and stepped back, washing her hands in the basin. "You'll live, if you're smart about it. Keep still. Let it heal. Move around too much and you'll tear it open again." "And if I need to relieve myself?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Then you ask politely, and I consider whether to trust you with untied hands for 5 minutes." Despite everything, Jacob found himself almost smiling back. "You've thought this through. I've had 2 nights to think while you were fevered. Plenty of time to work out the arrangements." She dried her hands on her apron. "Now, you hungry?" He was desperately so. She brought him cornmeal mush with a dollop of preserved berries, feeding him with the same impersonal care she'd shown while tending his wound. The food was simple but good, and he found himself wondering how she managed to preserve berries this late in winter. "You're wondering about me," Sarah said, settling back in her chair with her own bowl. "I can see it in your face. Just trying to figure out how a woman survives alone up here. Same way anyone does. Hard work, careful planning, and a good rifle." She took a bite of her mush. "My husband, Daniel was his name. He had grand plans for this place. Going to run cattle, maybe start a trading post when the railroad came through. But the railroad went south, and the cattle couldn't handle the winters. Then he got himself killed trying to help someone who didn't deserve it. And I was left with nothing but this cabin and stubbornness." "I'm sorry," Jacob said, and meant it. She shrugged. 3 years ago. I might have cried over it. Now it's just how things are." Her green eyes fixed on him. "What about you, Tom Garrett? What's your sad story?" He'd prepared for this question, had a lie ready about being a ranch hand heading south for work, but something in her direct gaze made the words stick in his throat. "Nothing so noble as yours," he said finally. "Just a man who made bad choices. Most men do." She rose and began clearing the dishes. Question is whether they learn from them. The day wore on in strange domesticity. Sarah went about her chores, mending clothes, checking her food stores, maintaining her weapons. She had 3 guns that Jacob could see, the Winchester, a Navy Colt revolver, and a shotgun mounted above the door. All were clean and well-oiled. This woman didn't just survive in the wilderness. She was prepared to defend her place in it. Around midday, she surprised him by bringing out a worn book. "Can you read?" "Some," Jacob admitted. His education had been spotty at best, A few months here and there in schoolhouses across the frontier, plus whatever he'd picked up on his own. Good. Gets mighty quiet up here in the winter. She opened the book seemingly at random. David Copperfield, my husband loved Dickens. Said it reminded him that other folks had hard times too. She read aloud in a clear, steady voice, and Jacob found himself drawn into the story despite himself. It was surreal, lying there, wounded, wanted by the law, listening to a woman he'd just met read about the troubles of an English orphan while a blizzard raged outside. When she tired of reading, she set the book aside and studied him. You're not Tom Garrett. It wasn't a question. Jacob's muscles tensed, but there was nowhere to run, nothing to do but meet her steady gaze. What makes you say that? Tom Garrett was my husband's cousin. Good man, but dull as dirt and settled in Missouri with 6 kids. She leaned back in her chair. So either you're a very interesting coincidence, or you're a liar. Jacob said nothing, weighing his options. The truth was dangerous, but lies seemed suddenly pointless in this small cabin where pretense felt as out of place as silk curtains. My name's Jacob, he said finally. Jacob Harlan. Her face went still, and he saw recognition flicker in her eyes. The outlaw, the one who robbed the cattleman's bank in Cheyenne, among other things. She was quiet for a long moment, absently spinning her wedding ring on her finger. They say you killed 3 men there. 2, Jacob corrected. And they were shooting at me first. Does that matter to their widows? He had no answer for that. Sarah stood abruptly and began banking the fire for the night. My husband died because he helped a wounded Apache warrior. Brought him to our barn, tended his wounds, shared our food. The townspeople found out and decided Daniel was an Indian lover, a traitor to his race. They dragged him from our bed one night and strung him up from a cottonwood tree. I found him the next morning, still swaying in the wind. She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. So, you see, Mr. Harlan, I have no love for the law or the good citizens who enforce their own version of it, but I also know what it is to be on the other side of violence, to pay the price for someone else's choices. I never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, Jacob said quietly. Maybe so, but you chose the life that put you in their path. She pulled a blanket from a chest and shook it out. I won't turn you in, not because I think you're innocent, but because I won't be party to more hanging. But when this storm breaks and you're healed enough to ride, you'll leave, and you'll never come back. Understood? Understood. She spread the blanket over him with surprising gentleness. Good. Now try to sleep. Your body needs rest to heal. As she prepared for bed herself, banking the fire, checking the door bar, laying out her rifle within easy reach, Jacob watched her through half-closed eyes. She moved through the cabin with the unconscious grace of someone completely at home in their space, every movement purposeful and sure, when she finally blew out the lamp, leaving only the firelight to hold back the dark. He heard her voice soft in the dimness. Jacob? Yeah? Thank you for not lying to me again. He listened to her breathing slow into sleep. While outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. In the morning, she would still be wary, still keep her distance. But something had shifted between them in the speaking of truths, a tiny crack in the walls they'd both built against the world. For now, it was enough. A week passed in the strange rhythm of their forced companionship. The storm showed no signs of breaking, sealing them in a world of white silence broken only by the wind's howl and the crack of ice-laden branches. Each day brought small negotiations of trust, Sarah allowing Jacob's hands to remain untied for longer periods, Jacob helping with simple tasks that didn't strain his healing wound. On the 8th morning, Jacob insisted on splitting firewood. Sarah protested, but their wood pile was running dangerously low, and they both knew one person couldn't maintain the cabin alone indefinitely. You'll tear your wound open, she warned, but she handed him the axe. Better than freezing to death, he replied, testing the weight of the tool. She watched from the doorway as he worked, ready to intervene if he faltered. The first few swings sent fire through his side, but he gritted his teeth and continued. The rhythm came back slowly. Lift, swing, split. His body remembered this honest work from before everything went wrong, when he'd been just another hand on a ranch in Texas, dreaming of nothing more than his own small spread someday. Sarah said nothing, but he caught her watching with something that might have been approval. When he'd split enough wood for 2 days, she helped him inside and checked his bandages. The wound had seeped a little but hadn't torn. "You're stubborn," she said, applying fresh bandages. "Pot calling the kettle black," he replied, which earned him the ghost of a smile. That night, the wind died to a whisper, and in the sudden quiet, they could hear wolves howling in the distance. Sarah stood by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters at the moonlit snow. "They're hunting," she said. "Prey's scarce in weather like this. They get desperate, take risks they normally wouldn't." "Like us," Jacob said without thinking. She turned to look at him. "How's that? Desperate creatures taking risks?" He gestured between them. "You, keeping an outlaw in your home. Me, trusting a woman with every reason to turn me in for the bounty." "How much are you worth?" she asked, and there was something almost teasing in her tone. $500, last I heard. Maybe more by now. That's a lot of money." "It is." She returned to her chair by the fire. "Not enough, though. Not near enough to buy back what I've lost." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wolves and the settling logs in the fireplace. Jacob found himself studying her face in the firelight, the determined set of her jaw, the way she absently tucked escaped strands of hair behind her ear, the faraway look that came over her sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching. "Tell me about him," Jacob said suddenly. "Your husband." Sarah's hand stilled on the mending in her lap. "Why?" "Because you think about him every time you look at me, and I'd rather know what ghost I'm competing with." She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Daniel was good, too good for this hard country. Maybe he believed in people, believed they'd do right if given the chance. He came from back east, Philadelphia, full of ideas about civilization and progress and the brotherhood of man." "You loved him." "I did. God help me. I did. Even when his foolishness made our lives harder, even when his principles cost us friends and neighbors, I loved his certainty that the world could be better than it was." She set aside her mending. "The night they came for him, I begged him to run. We could have slipped out the back, made it to the horses, but he wouldn't, said running would make him guilty of something he hadn't done wrong. So they hanged an innocent man. They hanged a man who helped another human being. In their eyes, that was crime enough." She met his gaze directly. "What about you, Jacob Harlan? Ever love someone enough to die for your principles?" Jacob thought of Mary Catherine, the banker's daughter in Fort Worth who'd promised to wait for him. She hadn't, of course. Married a shopkeeper the same month Jacob robbed his first stagecoach. "No," he said honestly. "Never saw much profit in principles. Yet, here you are, shot and bleeding for money that isn't even yours. That's different. That's survival." "Is it?" She rose and began preparing for bed. "Seems to me a man who'll risk death for money might risk it for something better, given the chance." That night, Jacob dreamed of rope and cottonwood trees, of good men swaying in the wind while their widows watched. He woke to find Sarah sitting bolt upright in her bed, gasping as if she couldn't get enough air. In the dim firelight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "Sarah?" She shook her head, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. "Just a dream. Go back to sleep." But he could hear her trying to muffle her sobs, and something twisted in his chest. Without thinking, he rose from his bed, crossed the small space between them, and sat on the edge of her mattress. "Don't," she whispered. But she didn't pull away when he carefully put his arms around her. She was rigid at first, every muscle tense with the effort of holding herself together. Then something broke, and she sagged against him, crying in earnest now. Great, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Jacob held her, saying nothing, one hand stroking her hair as his mother had done for him a lifetime ago.
"I see him," she gasped between sobs. "Every night I see him swinging from that tree, and I can't cut him down. I try, but the rope won't cut, and he just keeps swinging. And his eyes—"
"Shh," Jacob murmured. "It's done now. He's at peace. I couldn't even bury him proper. They wouldn't let me cut him down for 3 days. Said it was a warning to other Indian lovers." Her fingers clutched at his shirt.
"What kind of men do that? What kind of world is this?"
Jacob had no answer. He'd seen enough cruelty to know it needed no reason, no explanation beyond the darkness that lived in some men's hearts. So he just held her while she cried out 3 years of grief and rage, until finally she quieted, exhausted.
"I'm sorry,"
she whispered, starting to pull away. "Don't be." He caught her hand, held it gently. Nothing wrong with grieving someone worth grieving. She looked up at him, and in the dying firelight he saw something shift in her expression. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw.
"How did you get this?" "Knife fight in Amarillo. Man thought I was cheating at cards."
"Were you?" "No, I was just better than him." Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone. "You're not what I expected. Jacob Harlan. What did you expect?" "A monster," she said simply. "Someone I could hate without thinking twice." The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with possibility. Jacob could feel her breath on his face, see the pulse beating at her throat. It would be so easy to close that distance, to lose himself in the warmth of another human being who understood what it was to be alone. Instead, he carefully released her and stood. "You should try to get some more sleep. Morning comes early." Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment? Relief? He couldn't tell. She nodded and lay back down, pulling the quilts up to her chin. "Jacob? Yeah? Thank you." He returned to his bed, knowing that something fundamental had changed between them. The walls were still there, but they were thinner now, full of cracks where the light could get in. And that, he thought as he stared at the dying embers, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft as forgiveness, covering the tracks of wolves and men alike. In the morning, they would pretend this hadn't happened, would rebuild their careful distances. But for now, in the dark intimacy of a shared sorrow, they were just two people trying to survive the winter of their lives. The fire died to coals, and Jacob fell asleep listening to Sarah's breathing, steady now and deep, while somewhere in the darkness, Daniel Brennan's ghost finally stopped swinging in the wind. The mountain lion announced itself with a scream that cut through the night like a rusty blade. Sarah was on her feet before Jacob fully woke, the Winchester already in her hands. "Get the shotgun," she ordered, her voice steady despite the primitive fear that sound awakened in any creature with sense. Jacob rolled from bed, ignoring the protest from his healing wound, and pulled the shotgun from its mount. Outside, they could hear the horses screaming in terror, hooves thundering against the stable walls. "It's after the horses," Sarah said, already moving toward the door. "If we lose them—" She didn't need to finish. Without horses, they were as good as dead come spring. The cat screamed again, closer now, and through the window they caught a glimpse of yellow eyes reflecting in the moonlight. It was big, made bigger by winter hunger and desperation. "We go together," Jacob said. "You cover the stable, I'll watch the roof. They like to drop from above." Sarah looked at him sharply. "You've hunted cat before." "Once or twice." They slipped out into the brutal cold, moving as one unit across the packed snow. The horses were wild with fear, Jacob's Mustang throwing itself against the stable door while Sarah's mare kicked at the walls. The mountain lion was somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting for its moment. It came from the left, a tawny blur of muscle and claw launching itself at Sarah. Jacob swung the shotgun up and fired in one motion, the blast catching the cat mid-leap. It twisted in the air, screaming its fury, and hit the ground hard but not dead. Sarah's rifle cracked once, twice, and the cat went still. They stood in the sudden silence, breath misting in the cold air, both of them shaking with more than cold. The cat lay stretched out on the blood-stained snow, magnificent even in death, easily 8 feet from nose to tail, ribs showing through its winter coat. "Good shot," Sarah said finally. "Yours too." They dragged the carcass away from the stable, both of them grunting with effort. Jacob's side was on fire, and he could feel wetness that meant the wound had opened again. Sarah noticed him favoring it and frowned. "Inside. Now." Back in the cabin, she ordered him to strip off his shirt while she heated water. The wound had indeed torn partially open, blood seeping through the bandages. "Damn fool," she muttered, cleaning the wound with hands that still trembled slightly. "Could have let the cat have the horses." "No," Jacob said quietly. "I couldn't." She looked up at him then, something soft in her expression. "I know." As she worked, Jacob found himself studying her face, the concentration in her eyes, the way she bit her lower lip when focused on a task. Without thinking, he reached up and tucked a strand of loose hair behind her ear. Sarah went very still, her hands pausing in their work. Their eyes met and held, the air between them suddenly charged with possibility. "Jacob," she whispered, and it was half warning, half plea. "I know," he said, but he didn't drop his hand. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and he felt her shiver. "This is not—" She seemed to struggle for words. "We can't." "Why not?" The question came out rougher than he intended. "Because I'm an outlaw? Because you're still mourning? Because the world says it's wrong? Because you'll leave," she said simply. "Soon as the snow melts and you're healed, you'll ride out of here and I'll never see you again. And I've had enough of loving men who leave me, one way or another." The truth of it hung between them like a blade. Jacob wanted to deny it, to promise he'd stay, but the lies died in his throat. He was what he was, a man with blood on his hands and prices on his head. He couldn't offer her anything but more pain. "You're right," he said, dropping his hand. "I'm sorry." Sarah finished bandaging his wound in silence, her touch returning to the impersonal efficiency of those first days. When she was done, she stood and began cleaning up, her movements sharp with suppressed emotion. "Sarah, it's late," she interrupted. "We should sleep." But sleep wouldn't come for either of them. Jacob lay listening to her restless movements, the small sounds of a person trying too hard to be still. Finally, near dawn, exhaustion won and he drifted off. He woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee brewing. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world outside crystalline and brilliant. Sarah stood at the window, cup in hand, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. "It's beautiful," she said without turning. "Daniel used to say mornings like this were God's apology for the hard nights." Jacob rose carefully, testing his side, sore but manageable. He poured himself coffee and joined her at the window. The landscape was indeed magnificent, endless white broken by dark pine and the blue shadows of hidden valleys. "I had a woman once," he said quietly. "Before all this. Mary Catherine was her name, banker's daughter. Pretty as a spring morning and twice as sweet. She said she'd wait for me while I made my fortune out west. Did she? No. Married a shopkeeper before I'd been gone 6 months. Can't say I blame her. I wasn't much even then, just a ranch hand with big dreams and empty pockets." Sarah turned to look at him. "Is that why you started robbing? To prove something to her?" Jacob considered the question. Maybe at first, but somewhere along the way, it became about something else. The thrill of it, the freedom, being outside everything, beholden to no one. He gave a bitter laugh. "Look where that freedom got me." "It got you here," Sarah said softly. They stood close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, see the gold flecks in her green eyes. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth or softness, beautiful like the mountains themselves. shaped by hardship into something enduring. "Last night," she began, then stopped, seeming to gather courage. "When you held me, no one had done that since. It's been so long since anyone touched me with kindness." "Sarah." "No, let me finish." She set down her coffee cup and faced him fully. "I know what you are. I know you can't stay, but I'm so tired of being alone. Jacob, tired of being strong all the time, of having no one to share the load." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Would it be so wrong to pretend, just for a while, that things could be different?" Jacob set down his own cup and carefully, giving her time to pull away, drew her into his arms. She came willingly, her hands settling on his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the thin shirt. "It wouldn't be pretending for me," he said roughly. "Whatever else I am, I'm not that good a liar." She searched his face, looking for truth, and must have found it because she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, almost chaste, then deeper as the weeks of tension and loneliness crashed over them both, when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Sarah's cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright. "This changes nothing," she said firmly. When spring comes, we'll face it then," Jacob interrupted. "For now, can't we just have this?" She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, for now." They spent the rest of that brilliant day in a kind of suspended reality, allowing themselves the simple pleasure of each other's company without the weight of tomorrow. Jacob helped with chores his wound would allow, and they worked in companionable silence broken by occasional conversation. That evening, as they sat by the fire with the mountain lion's pelt drying on the wall, Sarah had insisted on keeping it. She read to him from Dickens again, but this time she sat beside him on the narrow bed, his arm around her shoulders. When darkness fell, she turned in his embrace and kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They came together like the survivors they were, finding warmth and life in each other against the cold press of mortality outside. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the heavy quilts, Sarah traced the scars on his chest with gentle fingers. "So many," she murmured. "So much pain." "Not now," Jacob said, catching her hand and pressing it over his heart. "Not anymore." She laid her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Brennan fell asleep without dreaming of swinging bodies in cottonwood trees. The deepest cold came in the 3rd week, when the snow piled so high it covered half the windows and turned the cabin into a cave of flickering shadows. The world outside disappeared entirely. No sky, no mountains, just an endless white that pressed against the walls like a living thing trying to swallow them whole. They'd fallen into a rhythm by then, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of long-married couples. Jacob's wound had healed enough that he could take on heavier chores, and they worked side by side to keep the endless winter at bay. But it was the nights that transformed them, nights when they came together beneath the heavy quilts and found in each other a warmth that had nothing to do with mere survival. On this particular evening, the wind howled with renewed fury, and they could hear the timbers of the cabin creaking under the weight of snow. Sarah stood at what little remained visible of the window, worry etched on her face. "Never seen it this deep," she said. "If it doesn't stop soon." She didn't finish, but Jacob knew what she meant. Cabins had been known to collapse under such weight. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him with a sigh. "We'll manage," he said into her hair. "Always do." She turned in his embrace, looking up at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip. "Listen to you, talking like you're planning to stay." The words hung between them, dangerous as naked blades. They'd been careful not to speak of the future, to live only in the eternal now of storm and snow, but reality had a way of creeping in through the cracks. "Sarah." "No." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't say it. Don't say anything that isn't true." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "What if it is true? What if I want to stay?" Wanting isn't enough. Her voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. You think I don't know who you really are? Jacob Harlan isn't just some small-time thief. You're wanted in 3 territories. There's nowhere you could go that they wouldn't eventually find you. We could go north, he said desperately. Canada. Maybe. Start fresh where nobody knows either of us. Running forever? She shook her head. That's no life. Jacob. Not for you. And not for me. I've got roots here, painful as they are. This cabin, this land, it's all I have left of Daniel, of the life we tried to build. Jacob wanted to argue, to rail against the unfairness of it all. But she was right, and they both knew it. He was a marked man, and anyone close to him would bear that mark too. He'd already cost her so much just by darkening her doorstep. That night, they made love with a desperate passion, as if trying to store up enough warmth to last a lifetime of cold. Sarah clung to him afterward, her face buried in the crook of his neck, and he felt wetness that might have been tears. I never expected this, she whispered. Never expected to feel anything again after Daniel died. Part of me wishes you'd never come here. Only part, he asked, trying for lightness. She raised her head to look at him, and her expression was fierce. The rest of me would do it all again, knowing how it ends. Is that foolish? If it is, we're both fools. They held each other as the storm raged on, and neither slept that night. There was too much to say, and no words adequate to say it. Too much to feel, and not enough time to feel it all. Morning brought an eerie stillness. The wind had finally died, and weak sunlight filtered through the snow-covered windows. They dressed in silence, the spell of the night broken by daylight's harsh truth. It was while Jacob was bringing in firewood that he saw them, tracks in the fresh snow, too regular to be animal. His blood went cold as he recognized the pattern. Horses, at least 3, circling the cabin sometime during the night. He set the wood down carefully and checked the loads in his pistol. Inside, Sarah was kneading bread dough, humming softly to herself. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faded at his expression. What is it? Riders were here, during the storm. The color drained from her face. She wiped her hands on her apron with deliberate calm. How many? 3, maybe 4. They circled but didn't approach. Probably couldn't see the cabin clear in the storm. But they'll be back. Yes. Sarah moved to the window, peering out through a small, clear spot. Could be anyone. Trappers, maybe, or... It's not trappers. Jacob's voice was flat. Trappers don't circle a cabin at night in a blizzard. It's a posse, or bounty hunters. Someone told them I headed into these mountains. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to him, her chin raised in that stubborn way he'd come to love. Then we'd better be ready. We. He crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. Sarah, no, this isn't your fight. Isn't it? She pulled free of his grip. You've been living in my home for 3 weeks, eating my food, sleeping in my bed. You think they'll believe I didn't know who you were? You think they'll care? The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd endangered her the moment he'd fallen through her door. Even if he left now, the damage was done. She was marked by association, guilty of harboring a fugitive whether she'd known it or not. I'm sorry, he said helplessly. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Don't... Her voice was sharp. Don't you dare apologize for surviving. We've both done what we had to do. She moved to the gun rack, checking the loads with practiced efficiency. Question is, what do we do now? Jacob watched her, this remarkable woman who'd already lost so much and now stood to lose everything because of him. An idea formed, desperate and probably foolish, but it was all he had. You could turn me in, he said quietly. Tell them I forced you, held you hostage. The bounty would be yours. Enough to start over somewhere else. The slap came so fast he didn't see it coming. His head rocked back, cheek stinging, and he found Sarah glaring at him with eyes like green fire. Don't you ever, she said, voice low and dangerous, suggest I betray someone under my protection. Not for money, not for safety, not for anything. Sarah, My husband died rather than betray a wounded man who'd done him no harm.
You think I'll do less? You think that little of me?
I think that much of you, Jacob said softly. That's why I want you safe. They stared at each other across the small space. Two people caught between impossible choices.
Finally,
Sarah's shoulders sagged.
There's no safe anymore,
she said wearily.
Hasn't been for a long time. There's just choosing which danger to face.
She was right. Of course, safety was an illusion. A story people told themselves to get through the night. Out here, in this harsh country that killed the weak and broke the strong, there was only survival and the choices you could live with. All right, Jacob said. Then we face it together, but on our terms, not theirs. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jacob showed Sarah how to set simple snares and trip lines around the cabin's perimeter, things that would slow attackers and give warning. They moved furniture to create defensive positions, stocked ammunition where it could be easily reached, filled every container with water in case they were besieged. As darkness fell, they made their rounds one last time, checking every approach, every potential weakness. The tracks in the snow had multiplied. Whoever was out there had been scouting throughout the day, learning the layout, planning their approach. They'll come at dawn, Jacob said with certainty. It's what I'd do. Back in the cabin, they ate a simple meal in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, Sarah spoke.
Tell me something true,
she said.
Something that's just yours, that has nothing to do with the price on your head.
Jacob thought for a moment. I had a dog once, when I was 8. Ugly little mutt, all bones and mange. But he followed me home and I couldn't shake him. My PA wanted to shoot him, said we couldn't afford another mouth to feed. But I hid him in the barn, shared my dinner with him every night, called him warrior, because he'd fight anything that came near me, chickens, pigs, even a bull once. What happened to him? Got between me and a rattlesnake when I was 10. Saved my life. Cost him his... Jacob smiled sadly at the memory. Never had another dog after that. Figured I'd used up my share of that kind of loyalty. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. You haven't. They made love that night with tender deliberation, memorizing each touch, each whispered word. Afterward, they lay entwined, neither willing to waste their remaining hours on sleep. However this ends, Sarah said against his chest. I want you to know something. These weeks with you, I've been more alive than I have in 3 years. You gave me that. You gave me back myself. Jacob pressed his lips to her hair, breathing in the scent of her. You saved me, Sarah Brennan, in more ways than one. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the tracks of hunters and hunted alike. But they both knew it was only a reprieve. Dawn would come, as dawn always did, bringing with it the reckoning they could no longer avoid. They held each other in the darkness, two souls who'd found shelter in the storm of their lives, waiting for whatever morning would bring. The footprints appeared in the dawn light like accusations written in snow. Jacob counted at least 5 distinct sets of tracks, maybe 6, converging on the cabin from different directions. They'd been smart about it, using the tree line for cover. But snow told tales that couldn't be hidden. They're moving into position, he said quietly, stepping back from the window. Won't be long now. Sarah finished loading the Winchester, her movements calm and precise. She'd braided her hair tight and donned her husband's old work clothes, more practical for what was coming. Let them come, she said. This is my land. They're the trespassers here. Jacob checked his Colt one more time, then positioned himself at the east window. Sarah took the west, the Winchester steady in her hands. They'd pushed the heavy table against the door and reinforced the shutters, but both knew these were merely delaying tactics. If the men outside wanted in badly enough, they'd find a way. The sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of gold and blue. For a moment, the world was heartbreakingly beautiful, peaceful as a church. Then a voice shattered the stillness. Jacob Harlan, this is Marshal Tom Briggs. We've got the cabin surrounded. Come out with your hands high, and nobody needs to get hurt." Jacob recognized the name. Briggs was a hard man but fair, not given to shooting first like some lawmen. That might give them a chance. "Including the woman," Jacob called back. "You guarantee her safety?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Brennan harboring a fugitive is a serious crime, but if she cooperates, I'm sure the judge will take that into consideration." Sarah snorted. "Consideration? Like they showed my Daniel consideration when they strung him up." "You don't have to do this," Jacob said urgently. "Tell them I held you at gunpoint, that you didn't have a choice. We've been through this." Her voice was steel. "I made my choice 3 weeks ago when I didn't let you freeze. I'm not changing it now." Outside, Briggs was losing patience. "You've got 5 minutes. Harlan, then we come in shooting." Jacob's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. They were outnumbered, outgunned, with nowhere to run. Even if they held off the first assault, they'd eventually run out of ammunition or food. This could only end one way. Unless— "Briggs," he called, "I'll make you a deal. Let the woman go. She's got nothing to do with my crimes, and I'll come out peaceful. You get your man, no bloodshed. That's gotta be worth something." "No!" Sarah spun to face him, eyes blazing. "Don't you dare. It's the only way," Jacob said softly. "You know it is." "I don't accept deals from outlaws," Briggs called back. "Both of you, or we come in shooting." Sarah moved from her position, crossing to Jacob in 2 quick strides. "You listen to me, Jacob Harlan. You don't get to decide my fate. Not you, not them, nobody but me." Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper. "We stand together, or not at all." He looked into her green eyes, saw the determination there, and knew there was no moving her. Stubborn, brave, foolish woman. He loved her more in that moment than he'd ever loved anything in his life. "Together, then," he said, and kissed her hard. They'd barely returned to their positions when the first shot shattered the morning air, splintering wood from the door frame. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions, lead hammering into the cabin's log walls like deadly hail. Jacob fired back through the gun port they'd cut in the shutters, saw one man spin and fall. Sarah's Winchester cracked steadily, keeping heads down on the west side. "They're trying to flank us," she called, ducking as a bullet whined past her ear. Jacob shifted position, caught movement in the trees to the north. He fired twice, driving the man back to cover. His shoulder blazed with pain at some point. A bullet had grazed him, though he hadn't noticed when. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the firing stopped. In the ringing silence, they could hear wounded men groaning and Briggs shouting orders. "You still alive in there? Harlan," the marshal called. "Still here. Your boys." "You winged 2 of them. Nothing fatal, but they're out of the fight." There was grudging respect in Briggs' voice. "That woman of yours can shoot." "Tell me something I don't know," Jacob muttered, which earned him a quick smile from Sarah despite everything. "This is your last chance," Briggs continued. "Surrender now, or we burn you out." Jacob's blood went cold. Fire was every cabin dweller's nightmare. Nowhere to run, no way to fight it. He looked at Sarah, saw the same realization in her eyes. "You'd burn out a woman?" Jacob called. "Playing for time. That's Marshall's justice these days. Don't put this on me. Harlan, you made your choices. Both of you." Sarah set down the Winchester and picked up the shotgun, checking its load. "If they try to get close enough to set fires, I'll make them pay for it." But they both knew it was a losing game. All Briggs had to do was put men with torches at multiple points. They couldn't cover every approach, not with just 2 of them. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. "For all of this, you deserved better." Sarah moved to him, cupped his face in her hands. "Stop apologizing for things beyond your control. I'm here because I choose to be, because for the first time in 3 years, I have something worth fighting for." She smiled, sad and beautiful. "Even if it's only for a morning." Outside, they could hear movement, men getting into position for the final assault. Jacob reloaded his Colt, tried to think of some miracle that might save them, but miracles were in short supply in this hard country. "Jacob," Sarah said suddenly. "The root cellar." He'd forgotten about it, a small dugout beneath the cabin where she stored preserves and potatoes. It had an external entrance, hidden now beneath the snow. If they could reach it unseen. "They'll be watching the cabin," he said, but hope flickered despite himself. Not the whole perimeter, not with men wounded. She was already moving, gathering ammunition and what supplies she could carry. "We go out through the floor. Come up behind the woodshed. The trees are thick there, if we can reach them." It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was a chance, which was more than they'd had a moment ago. They worked quickly, using the iron pry bar to lift the floorboards. The cellar below was cramped and musty, but the external door was clear. Sarah went first, Jacob covering the cabin in case Briggs's men tried to rush them. "Harlan," Briggs called. "Time's up. What's it going to be?" "Give me a minute," Jacob called back. "The woman's scared. I'm trying to talk sense into her." He heard Briggs curse, but the marshal gave them their minute. It might be all they needed. Jacob dropped into the cellar, pulling the boards back into place above him. In the darkness, he felt Sarah's hand find his. "Ready?" she whispered. "No," he said honestly, "but let's go anyway." She pushed open the external door, and clean winter air flooded in. They emerged behind a snowdrift, hidden from the cabin's front. The woodshed was 20 feet away. The tree line another 30 beyond that. It might as well have been a mile. "On 3, Sarah breathed. 1, 2. A shout went up from somewhere to their left. They'd been spotted. "Run!" Jacob grabbed her hand, and they plunged through the deep snow toward the trees. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets whining past like angry hornets. The woodshed exploded in splinters as they passed it, and then they were in the trees, branches whipping at their faces as they ran. More shouts, men crashing through the underbrush after them. But Jacob knew these mountains now, had learned their secrets during his weeks of recovery. He pulled Sarah along a deer trail, then off it into a narrow ravine choked with deadfall. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs shook, putting distance between themselves and their pursuers. Finally, when they couldn't run anymore, they collapsed behind a massive fallen pine, gasping in the thin mountain air. "Did we lose them?" Sarah panted. Jacob listened. He could hear voices, but distant now, confused. "For now, but they'll bring in trackers, dogs maybe. We bought ourselves time, nothing more." "Time for what?" He looked at her, hair come loose from its braid, face flushed with exertion, eyes bright with fierce life, and made a decision. "Time to get you somewhere safe. There's a mining camp about 15 miles north. You can... If you say leave you behind, I swear I'll shoot you myself." She interrupted. "Sarah, be practical. Together we're easy to track. Alone, you could..." She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and desperate. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet but determined. "No more noble sacrifices. Jacob Harlan, we run together or fight together, but no more of this leaving business. You're stuck with me now, for better or worse. Despite everything, the danger, the cold, the certainty of pursuit." Jacob found himself smiling. "Sounds almost like a wedding vow." "Maybe it is," she said simply. "Maybe that's all we get, a promise made in the wilderness with God and the mountains as witness." He kissed her again, softer this time, sealing whatever promise they were making. Then he helped her to her feet. "North, then," he said, "together." They set off through the snow-laden forest, two figures against the vastness of winter and mountain. Behind them, smoke began to rise from the direction of the cabin, Briggs making good on his threat, but they didn't look back. Whatever lay ahead, capture, death, or by some miracle, freedom. They would face it as they'd faced everything else these past weeks. Together. Dawn came like judgment, painting the snow crimson with first light. They'd made camp in a shallow cave, little more than a depression in the rock face, but it had hidden them through the night. Jacob woke to find Sarah already alert, the Winchester across her knees, standing watch as she'd insisted on doing for the last hours before sunrise. "You should have woken me," he said, sitting up stiffly. Every muscle ached from their flight through the mountains. "You needed rest more than I did." She didn't take her eyes off the approach to their shelter. "That shoulder's still bleeding." He touched the makeshift bandage, felt the wetness there. The graze from yesterday's fight had opened during their escape, but there'd been no time to tend it properly. "I've had worse. That's not the comfort you think it is." Despite everything, he smiled. Even now, fleeing for their lives, she could still make him want to laugh. He moved to sit beside her, their shoulders touching. "They're coming," she said quietly. "I can feel them." He didn't argue. The mountains had a way of telling you things if you listened, and Sarah had been listening to these mountains for 3 years, as if summoned by her words. They heard it, the distant baying of hounds. Jacob's heart sank. Dogs changed everything. No trick of backtracking or false trails would throw them off the scent. "How far?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. 2 hours, maybe less." He stood, pulling her up with him. "We need to move." They broke camp quickly, destroying what little sign they'd left. The plan, such as it was simple. Reach the old trapper's bridge across Skeleton Creek. Once across, they could cut the ropes, stranding their pursuers on the wrong side. It would buy them time to reach the mining camp, where they could lose themselves among the crowds. Maybe find horses, supplies, a chance at escape. But Skeleton Creek was still 10 miles through rough country, and the dogs were closing fast. They pushed hard through the morning, following game trails when they could, breaking their own path when they couldn't. The snow was deep here, in some places waist-high, and each step was a battle. Sarah never complained, never asked to rest, but Jacob could see the exhaustion in her face, the way she stumbled more frequently as the hours wore on. The baying grew closer, echoing off the canyon walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, worse than the dogs, they heard gunshots, 3 evenly spaced reports, a signal. The hunters had found their trail. "Here," Jacob said, guiding Sarah off the main path into a thicket of young pines. "We make our stand here." "We can't stop," she protested. "The bridge." "We'll never make it, not with them this close." He checked his Colt, counted his remaining ammunition. Not enough, not nearly enough. But maybe we can slow them down, buy ourselves another chance. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She found a position behind a fallen log, the Winchester steady in her hands. Jacob took cover behind a boulder, watching their back trail. They didn't have long to wait. The first rider appeared through the trees, following the dogs eagerly. Jacob let him get close, then fired. The man toppled from his saddle, clutching his thigh. Not a killing shot, but it would take him out of the fight. Shouts erupted from the forest, and suddenly the air was full of lead. Jacob and Sarah returned fire, careful with their ammunition, making each shot count. The attackers pulled back, regrouping, and for a moment there was silence except for the whimpering of the wounded man. "Harlan!" It was Briggs's voice, closer than Jacob had expected. "This is finished. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of places to run. Let the woman go. Whatever happens to you, she doesn't deserve to die for your crimes." "My crimes?" Sarah called back, her voice ringing clear. "What about the crime of hanging an innocent man? What about leaving his widow to fend for herself while the good citizens of Willow Creek celebrated their justice? Where were you then, Marshal Briggs?" There was a pause. "I wasn't Marshal then, ma'am, but I heard about your husband. That was a bad business, and I'm sorry for it. But it doesn't change what's happening now." "Doesn't it?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You hunt us like animals for the crime of survival, of finding comfort in each other. Tell me, Marshal, what's the real crime here?" Jacob saw movement to their left, men trying to flank their position. He fired twice, driving them back, but his ammunition was running dangerously low. They had minutes at most. Then Sarah did something that stopped his heart. She stood up, fully exposed. The Winchester pointed at the ground. "Sarah, get down!" But she ignored him, addressing the hidden lawmen. "You want to end this without more bloodshed? Then listen, I'll make you a deal. Marshal Briggs, let him go. Let Jacob Harlan disappear into these mountains, and I'll come willing. Tell whatever story you want, that I was his hostage, that I didn't know who he was. I'll support it, but you let him go." "Sarah, no!" Jacob started to rise, but she turned on him, eyes fierce. "Stay down!" she hissed. Then, louder, "What say you, Marshal? One life for another." "You still get to be the hero who rescued the poor widow. Your reputation stays intact, and nobody else has to die today." The silence stretched like a held breath. Jacob's mind raced, looking for a way out, any way that didn't end with Sarah sacrificing herself for him. But before Briggs could answer, another voice cut through the morning air. Younger, harder, eager for blood. "To hell with deals! She's harboring a killer!" A shot rang out. Sarah spun, clutching her side, and fell. "No!" Jacob was moving before the echo faded, catching her as she collapsed. Blood seeped between her fingers, spreading dark across her shirt. Everything happened at once. Jacob fired wildly at the trees, rage making him careless. Return fire shattered the air around him. He felt a hammer blow to his shoulder, another to his leg, but he kept shooting until the Colt clicked empty. Then Briggs was there, knocking the gun from Jacob's hand, shouting for his men to hold fire. But Jacob only had eyes for Sarah, cradled in his arms, her face going pale as snow. "You promised," she whispered, blood flecking her lips. "You promised we'd face it together." "I'm here," he said desperately, pressing his hand over hers on the wound. "I'm right here. Stay with me. Sarah, please." She smiled, that sad, beautiful smile he'd fallen in love with. Was worth it, every minute. No regrets. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. We'll get you to a doctor." But her eyes were already losing focus, looking past him to something he couldn't see. Tell me something true." His throat closed, but he forced the words out. "I love you, Sarah Brennan. First time I saw you pointing that Winchester at me, I knew I was lost. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. That's a good truth." Her hand found his face, touch light as snow. "My turn. I choose this. Choose you. Would do it. All over again." Sarah, but she was gone, slipping away between one breath and the next, leaving him holding her empty body while her blood soaked into the unforgiving snow. A sound tore from Jacob's throat, part scream, part sob. Holy animal. He pulled her against him, rocking back and forth, oblivious to his own wounds. To the men standing in a silent circle around them. "Damn it," he heard Briggs say quietly. "Damn it all to hell. Williams, when I find out who took that shot." But Jacob wasn't listening. He was lost in his grief, holding the woman who'd shown him what it meant to be truly alive. The woman who'd chosen him, knowing the cost, and paid it without flinching. Time passed, minutes or hours. He couldn't tell. Finally, Briggs's hand fell on his shoulder, not roughly. "It's over, son. Let her go." Jacob looked up at the marshal through eyes blurred with tears. "She wasn't supposed to die. It was supposed to be me. I'm the outlaw. I'm the one with blood on my hands." Yeah, well, seems like the world doesn't much care what's supposed to happen." Briggs sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted it to end." They had to pry Sarah from his arms eventually. Jacob watched, numb, as they wrapped her in a blanket, treating her body with more gentleness than they'd shown her in life. His own wounds throbbed, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. What did it matter if he bled out here? What was there left to survive for? But his treacherous body refused to die. They bandaged him roughly, enough to keep him alive for the trip back to face trial. As they lifted him onto a horse, hands bound, he looked back one last time at the small, still form in the snow.
I would have stayed,
He whispered, knowing she couldn't hear, needing to say it anyway. Given the chance, I would have stayed forever. Then they were moving, leaving that blood-stained clearing behind. But Jacob carried it with him, the weight of her in his arms, the light fading from her green eyes, the price of a love that bloomed in winter and died with the dawn. The mountains watched them go, silent and eternal, keeping their secrets. And somewhere in their heights, the wind sang a morning song for a woman who'd chosen love over safety, and a man who'd learned too late what was worth fighting for. Spring came to the mountains like a hesitant miracle, melting the snow to reveal the earth beneath, scarred but ready for new growth. Jacob Harlan, though he no longer thought of himself by that name, stood at the edge of a small cemetery overlooking a valley where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. The headstone was simple, carved from local granite. Sarah Brennan, 1862 to 1890. She chose love. He'd been coming here every week for 2 months now, ever since the trial that should have ended with a rope around his neck. But Marshal Tom Briggs had done something unexpected. He'd told the truth, told the judge about the unauthorized shot, about Sarah's sacrifice, about a woman who'd already paid too high a price for the law's version of justice. The judge, an old man who'd seen too much of frontier justice gone wrong, had looked at Jacob for a long time before speaking. Mr. Harlan, you've done things worthy of hanging, but it seems to me you've already received a life sentence of a different kind. The woman's death is on my conscience, not yours. He'd been released with conditions: restitution to be paid to those he'd robbed, honest work to be found and kept, regular reports to Marshal Briggs. It was more mercy than he'd deserved, more than he'd wanted. Living, it turned out, was harder than dying would have been. "Morning, Sarah," he said quietly, setting down the bundle of wildflowers he'd gathered. Indian paintbrush and mountain laurel, the same flowers that had been blooming when they'd fled through these mountains. "Spring's here proper now. You'd like how green everything's getting." He'd taken work at the Garrison Ranch, using his real name, Jonathan McCready. It felt strange after years of aliases, but Sarah had known his true name, had whispered it in the darkness of their last night together. Using it now felt like keeping a promise. The work was hard but honest, and old Sam Garrison asked no questions about the scars or the haunted look that never quite left his eyes. The other hands kept their distance at first, but gradually accepted him as just another man trying to make his way. "Met a fellow yesterday," he continued, settling cross-legged beside the grave. "Circuit preacher, traveling through, got to talking about forgiveness, redemption, all those things preachers talk about. He asked if I thought a man could change, really change. I told him I didn't know, but I was trying to find out." A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals rising from the warming earth. Jacob watched it, remembering Sarah's voice reading Dickens, talking about how even the hardest ground could yield new growth if you tended it right. "I've been writing to them," he said suddenly. "The families of the men the ones who got hurt because of me. Most don't write back, and I don't blame them. But one did, widow in Cheyenne, said she appreciated knowing her husband died quick, that he wasn't alone at the end, said she was trying to forgive, for her own sake, more than mine." He pulled a worn letter from his pocket, one of the few possessions he'd kept. Sarah had written it during one of his fevered nights, when she wasn't sure he'd survive. He'd found it in her things after, given to him by Briggs with gruff sympathy. "My dear Jacob," he read aloud, though he knew the words by heart. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're not. Don't you dare blame yourself. We both knew the risks, and I chose them with eyes wide open. You gave me 3 weeks of being truly alive. That's more than some folks get in a lifetime. Live, Jacob. Live and be the man I saw in you, the one you were before the world turned you hard. That's all I ask. That, and remember me sometimes when the mountains are beautiful. All my love, Sarah." His voice broke on the last words, as it always did. He folded the letter carefully, returned it to his pocket. "I'm trying," he whispered. God knows I'm trying. But it's hard without you. Everything's harder without you. The sun climbed higher, warming his face. Somewhere in the valley below, he could hear cattle lowing, the shouts of cowboys beginning their day's work. Life going on, as it always did, indifferent to individual grief. Boss says I'm doing good work. He continued. Might make foreman if I stick around. Funny, isn't it? I stole more money in one robbery than I'll make in 10 years of honest work. But it sits easier. Somehow. Like you said, honest work for honest pay. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. There was work waiting, fences to mend, horses to tend. The kind of simple tasks that kept a man's hands busy while his heart learned to carry its burden. I met someone yesterday needs mentioning, he said, hat in hand. Young kid, maybe 16, hanging around the saloon trying to act tough. Could see myself in him, that hunger for something more than what life's handed out. I bought him a meal, told him about choices, about where they lead. Don't know if he listened, but I had to try. Figured you'd want me to. A breeze stirred the wildflowers, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. For a moment, he could almost imagine her there beside him, green eyes bright with approval. Williams, the one who shot you, he got drummed out of the service. Briggs saw to that. Doesn't bring you back, but at least he won't be carrying a badge anymore. He paused, struggled with the next words. I wanted to kill him. For weeks. That's all I thought about. But then I remembered what you said about the cycle, about violence begetting violence. So I let it go. Figured you'd already paid enough for everyone's sins. The town bells rang the hour, echoing across the valley. Time to go, to return to the world of the living. But he lingered another moment, hand resting on the sun-warmed stone. I love you, Sarah Brennan. He said simply. Loved you from that first moment you opened your door, rifle in hand, ready to face down the storm. Love you still, and will until I join you on the other side of this veil of tears. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for showing me who I could be. He set his hat on his head and walked down the hillside, boot heels clicking on stone. Behind him, the wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and the mountains stood eternal guard over a woman who'd chosen love over life, and changed a man's soul in the choosing. In town, he stopped at the general store, purchased supplies for the ranch. The proprietor, who'd been cold to him at first, now nodded with something approaching friendliness. Afternoon. McCready. How's things at the garrison spread? Good enough. Mr. Peterson. Spring roundup's keeping us busy. I imagine so. Peterson wrapped his purchases in brown paper. Say, my wife mentioned she could use some help with the church social next week. Cooking and such for the whole town. You interested in lending a hand? 6 months ago, Jacob would have laughed at the idea. Now he just nodded. I'll be there. What time? As he loaded the supplies onto the ranch wagon, he caught sight of himself in the store window. The man looking back was leaner than the outlaw Jacob Harlan had been, marked by loss and weather and hard work. But there was something else there, too. Something Sarah would have recognized. The beginning of peace. The road back to the ranch led past the burnt ruins of Sarah's cabin. He'd been back once, to salvage what he could. Her books, singed but readable. The mountain lion pelt, which now hung in his small ranch house room. The wedding photograph of her and Daniel, which he'd sent to her sister back east along with news of her death. He didn't stop today. The past was there, would always be there. But the present demanded attention. There were horses to tend, work to be done, a life to be lived as best he could. It wasn't the life he'd planned or the one he'd have chosen, but it was the life Sarah had bought with her blood, and he'd honor that gift. As the wagon rolled through the greening valley, he found himself humming an old hymn Sarah used to sing while working. The words came slowly, rusty with disuse. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The mountains listened, as they always did, keeping their secrets and their dead. But sometimes, when the wind was just right and the wildflowers bloomed thickest, you could almost hear an answering voice, gentle as spring rain, singing along. and in a small cemetery overlooking a valley where new life pushed through old sorrow. A simple stone stood witness to a love that had bloomed in winter and changed two souls forever. Not a happy ending, perhaps, but an ending with hope, which, in this hard country that broke the weak and tested the strong, was miracle enough. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story from? Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Sarah and Jacob's story. Did their love touch your heart as it did mine?